Okay, thanks, Letitia. So I'm really delighted to be here for this first session of the new series of the research training events, and to be able to welcome so many people. I'd also like to say how fortunate we are to have on the BALEAP exec 2 people in the role of research and publications officer. One, Susie, based in the UK, and Letitia, as you know, based overseas. So we have double the energy and expertise brought to this area of activity around scholarship and research for EAP practitioners. And it's great to be able to look forward to the forthcoming series, focusing on different areas in relationship to scholarship and research. So as you'll know from seeing the programme, SFL, assessment, ethics, LCT, and activity in other areas also relating to research and scholarship, such as the EAP conversations, book reviews, and so on. So once again, welcome to everyone here. I know we have a packed couple of hours this session, so I'll hand back to Susie and Letitia to introduce the speakers. And thank you both for all the work you've done to put this series together.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah,
thank you, Sarah.
I'm not sure double the energy is right, Letitia, is it? I think between us probably got one person's energy, but me anyway. But yeah, so I'm not really going to say much other than just before we introduce the speakers, just to say that what Letitia and I are trying to do is to put on a lot of events that the membership want, the membership asks for, and the membership contribute to. So we're just here very much as facilitators today. We've got the Zoom account and that's it, and we kind of book the time. But it's really over to the guys who are leading the session. So if you do have any ideas, or if you're inspired by anything, please do get in touch with us, email us, and I'll put our email in the link if you don't know. It's just research@baleap.org for any ideas for future ResTES events or things you'd like to see. Either you'd like to deliver them with a group, or whether you just would like to see something put on. One thing we are aiming to do is to try and get collaboration across institutions. So that's how we're really hoping to sort of take the direction of the ResTES. So it's great to be able to say that we've got 3 people from Leeds, and we've all, I think, many of us are aware of the great work that Leeds does and the amazing sort of encouragement they get to be engaged with SWOPL and stuff. So it's great to have Milada, Michelle, and Simon from Leeds, and we also have Daron from the National University of Singapore. I'm not going to say any more than that because I'm sure you can introduce yourself much better than I can. So I believe it's over to Michelle first. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Is it you? Hello.
Hi. It's nice to see you. Yeah, it's nice to see everybody. So I just want to check. So would you like me to share the slides from my side, Millie, Simon and Daron, or would one of you want to share and I talk through?
So I think it's best if we each share the slides anew for our own slot.
No problem.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Sorry, I was dashing late in from a critical reading drop-in. So let me just sorry about this.
Michelle. I was saying, Michelle, we need to have some music, some kind of background music for awkward silence. I'm going to do that for the next ResTES. That's my job.
Yeah. So what I might do is see if I'm able to give you the link to the PowerPoint slides yourself as well. That might be a good idea. So you can access any hyperlinks. Before I share my screen. Okay. Sorry about this, folks. And no, I don't think it will allow me to upload it. Okay.
I've just made you co-host, Michelle, if that helps. I'm not quite sure. Just if
Michelle,
that helps you to share.
I can share the link while you get the slides up. Yeah, why don't I do that?
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks. So if I share from here, I think you should be able to see that now. Is that right?
Yeah, it's all fine.
Brilliant. Just means I can't see what's popping up in this chat as well. Yeah, so thanks very much, and thanks for being patient with me there. Yeah, I'm Michelle Evans. As Susie said, I work with Millie and Simon at Leeds, and we've organised this with Daron. I'll just take you through then the plan. So we thought we might start with a little bit of a reflection, perhaps, or discussion about our motivations when we are writing for publication, and moving on to have a quick kind of overview of different types of publications, and maybe some factors that we might think about when we're making decisions of places to publish. And Millie's going to go on to talk in more detail about approaches and strategies and kind of concerns around publishing in journals. And Simon will go on, I think he might be joining us a little bit later. He's going to go on to discuss writing strategies. And Daron is going to work with you around writing networks, and hopefully, who knows, there might be some scope for collaboration and work to continue towards the end. As you were saying, Susie, these sorts of opportunities might be, these sorts of forums might be ideal for things like that to come out of. So let's see how we get on. So you should be able to, if you, in terms of thinking about motivations, kind of, I think maybe when Millie and I first had a conversation about this, I think I may have been having a bit of an existential crisis about what I was doing, what I was striving towards, and why are we even doing this? And so I said, well, maybe we could have a look at, just a little bit of reflection time. What are we doing here? What are our motivations for publishing and sharing our sweat and tears with the public? So you should be able to access a short form that was there was two parts to it, and they were kind of adapted from two different publications noted here, one from IC and in different contexts, and Niles et al. In US and Canada, and IC in Hong Kong, China. And I kind of pulled together different parts of this, asking people really, different academics, why are you doing this? What's your motivation? So the first link, I think it should follow me through. I ask you to think about which statements apply to you, and the chances are many of them will. And I think these probably change over time, or change in the context we're working in. And we can have a look at the results as they come up together. And the second part of this is for you to try to rank in order of which factors do you feel are most influential for you. So the most important would be at the top, and the least important you would put at the bottom. So that's a little bit of a, so you might say, I can't do that, there's too many parallels or whatever, but see how you get on. I'll also put the link to that form in the chat box, and that
I've done that, Michelle.
Daron, thank you. That's great. Can you see the results on my screen? Brilliant. I think, yeah. Nobody's put other yet. So does it mean that IC Lee had it covered? Like every possible reason is there.
I don't know if you can see can you see the chat, Michelle?
Let's see. To fight the power. Brilliant. Yeah, that might link to some of the next things we'll talk about of where you choose to publish and where you're most likely to be allowed to fight the power. So about half, I think half of the group so far have voted want to contribute to knowledge in the field. Writing with others helps to develop. My thinking. So gaining membership in the academic community compared to maintaining your role in the academic community, there's a difference there.
There's another comment in the chat, Michelle. Neil says that like learning a language is helpful for teaching, like writing is helpful for teaching and writing, right?
Mm-hmm. Writing is helpful for teaching writing. Unless you're a terrible writer, like me. Millie read a draft of my work last week, and I gave me some home truths. Yeah, it's a good. I think it's a good a point, isn't it, about this thing of referring to your own experiences and the extent to which you feel you can generalize or from that. Yeah.
And the pressure as well, like when you teach EAP to do everything beautifully and like have everything beautifully structured, and it's like, I don't know how to write.
Yeah. You send into people emails to people in the university, and you proofread one email like 10 times because you work in the language center. Yeah. Okay. So I think most people, we could kind of take it from here. I don't know if somebody wants to kind of say any thoughts about this, or what they kind of ticked or didn't tick. But it seems, yeah, wanting to contribute to knowledge in the field is trumping at the minute. Developing your thinking and gaining membership in the academic community. I'm just going to have a look at the second one. So when you're thinking about publishing work, which factors are most influential for you? Okay. So the readership is coming in first, and the financial rewards are last. Okay. The cost or lack of cost to publish is quite down the list, actually. That's interesting. I don't know how many people in the EAP community pay to have their work published. It's not really a thing for us, is it? Okay. Prestige of the journal or publisher. Is it something you regularly read? The impact factor. I don't know if somebody wants to kind of comment on their choices here, whether what you're thinking was perhaps, you know, whether it might be different depending on even our contract types. You know, if you are involved in ref or something, whether that might change your thoughts about, you know, the impact factor or citations or something. Or anybody want to say anything about the process they went through in doing that, or not? Sam?
Yes.
Hello.
Is it all right to unmute? I don't really know.
Absolutely, please do.
Well, I had just gotten a job working at a university, so I've never published before. I've never had any need to publish before. So I'm hoping to get a little information from this meeting. So when it came to me filling out the order, some of it I didn't know about. Like I'd never heard about cost before, for example, so that was low on my list, as I wasn't sure if it would apply to me or not, for example.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. Also, I think, John, you said some journals will ask for a payment to make the article open access. Okay, I don't know if you want to say any more about that. I think this kind of is going into the thing we were going to look at next as well, actually. But perhaps later on, John, in the conversations, you could say something about that and we could have a conversation about it. And Rob, sorry, go on.
That's something I'd like to find out about. I don't have any information, but that's my guess.
Okay, yeah. Is there anybody else who could answer, who knows anything about the costs and the open access publishing?
Hi, so I'm based in Elsevier, so I might be able to help you with this. I don't know if you want to cover it now or I can answer questions later, whatever's easiest.
I don't mind, but perhaps now while we're here.
Yeah, for sure. So this is open access, is basically a relatively new, I'd say it's increased exponentially in the last sort of 5 years probably, and it's where the author pays a fee to publish their article, and that article is then made freely available, rather than the traditional model where the universities pay a subscription, and unless you're based at that university, your article is behind a paywall. So each journal has its own fee, and that depends on the field, the journal, the amount of open access publishing that's happening. Within social sciences, we find that open access is generally low, take-up is low, simply because the funding isn't there in the same way that it is in kind of, medical disciplines, things like that. There's also a move now to publishers signing agreements with universities called read and publish. So for the same fee, the universities can both publish open access and read any articles that are behind paywalls. So it works out a little bit better kind of economically for everyone. So what you might find is that your university already has this option. So when you go to submit a paper to an Elsevier journal, your fee is already covered by your university. And I can send some links around afterwards with more information about those agreements. I think for our linguistics journals, they tend to be around $1,000. And then there's things like waivers for people in maybe low-income countries, or different universities. There's lots of different aspects there. So it might vary on an individual basis. But open access is a bit of a complex area, and it's very controversial. There's lots of different opinions, but I'd be happy to answer any questions on that.
Thanks so much. That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Rachel. That's really good.
No worries. The other thing just to add is there's no need for you to publish open access unless you are mandated by your funding body. So don't feel the pressure to pay unless you have the ability to pay. Most universities have a subscription with the big publishers, so most people will be able to still read your research. So don't worry too much. If no one's approached you about paying to publish, don't worry too much about it.
Yeah. I think at Leeds at the minute there is a kind of a town hall meeting about this, with having this discussion about how much they want to charge the university for this. I think they want to increase it for certain publications, like massively. Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much. That's excellent. I'm just mindful of the time. So here was a very brief overview. Again, you can click on the link and it will take you to a Word document that shows that table in a more accessible way. You can zoom into it a lot easier than seeing it on the screen here. these were some kind of factors coming from those texts that might influence where you choose to publish, and kind of reflect on why you're going for the type of publication that you're going for, and have you considered maybe other possibilities, other alternatives, depending on, as we've spoken about, your purposes for publishing and who you're trying to reach, and why you're trying to reach them, I suppose. I think in the preparation for today, when we looked at this together, I think there was a bit of a critique that we risk overgeneralizing massively. Yes, I think we could be. And these are just some kind of suggestions and ideas. And you can, look and see to the extent to which you agree or disagree based on where you are and your own experiences. Just to say that in terms of conference proceedings, if anybody haven't had any questions about conference proceedings, I was involved in as co-editor for the BALEAP conference proceedings, and I'm sure we have people with us today who have been involved in other conference proceedings. So if you wanted to ask any questions about those, then hopefully we will have time at the end perhaps to have those questions. I think it's right to say that BALEAP, the conference proceedings will be digital from the Leeds going forward. I think Sarah might be able to confirm that, but my understanding is that's the plan. It's an e-copy rather than the hard copies that you would collect usually at the conference from the conference before. Conference proceedings might be more developmental, possibly. It depends. Sometimes, certainly for the Leeds iteration, it was deemed to be developmental. So it was, the feedback was intended to be supportive and to help colleagues to take whatever next steps they needed to take. It wasn't a cutthroat kind of exercise there may have been some heavy editing suggestions, but it was hopefully done in a supportive kind of, way, rather than just do this on your own. I don't know if Susie or Letitia had anything more to say about the other BALEAP, the BALEAP conference proceedings since then, whether it's still developmental. I think it would be.
Yes, I mean, I think to go back to your point about making it accessible online, that's certainly in the works, and having it searchable, having the papers searchable as well. And as far as development, I think Carol is working on this with the Glasgow group, but I expect so. Yes, I expect they will adopt quite a few of those elements that you had at least.
Mm. Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's good to know. So the next column along, I'm just going to talk about very quickly, because then really the journal articles section, actually a lot of the kind of comments and questions in that table, in that column, Millie will be picking up on in her section. So in terms of book chapters in edited volumes, there are some things to think about whether you've been invited to contribute, and how do you get to a position where somebody might come to you and ask you to make a contribution? What sorts of engagement activities, and how do you kind of share your work and your stance and positioning on a topic, with the community? And that might involve, for example, the use of blogs beforehand as well as other publications. So are you invited, or is it something that you have applied, you've written a proposal for a chapter? And there are important questions to think about. What's the nature of the relationship, maybe between you and the editors? Do they know you and your work? Also, one question in the middle there about the impact on knowledge, or how people might use if you are writing a chapter, came from a discussion with Steve Kirk I had last week. and he was reflecting on writing a chapter for the Bloomsbury volume, Social Theory for EAP, and I'm co-editing that with Alex Ding. So if you want any questions, ask any questions about the editing of a edited volume, that I might be able to share some kind of novice new, because it's my first time, you see, so it's been a bit of an eye-opener and a learning curve for me. But if you wanted to ask any questions about how that process has been for me, then feel free. So anyway, Steve Kirk was reflecting on kind of thinking about his audience and, you know, who he was writing for and choosing what to write about. Obviously, he's writing about RCT, but which parts of RCT? And he asked himself, well, what I'm writing and how I'm writing it, how could this influence how others use this chapter? And, you know, taking some kind of responsibility, thinking about how they might use it. Okay, I don't know if anybody wants to add or comment on any of the little snippets of questions before we move on to Millie. The Word document is there. You can go and add anything you want onto it. If we might decide to start a bit of a resource collection, who knows, you know, put this on some sort of platform, and if the more people can share experiences and add or you know, challenge some of these statements, I think the better, really. So do access that Word document and add whatever you want to. I don't know if I've missed any questions in the chat before we move on.
I don't think so.
Do any journals offer support or development in the same way that book editors sometimes offer? So proposal, discussion of drafts, or ongoing guidance. If we were talking about journals, it might be a good time to move over to Millie, who's had more experience working with journals and submitting and going through this process. Is that okay? Great.
Thank you, Michelle. I will now share my screen to essentially share the same PowerPoint. If this works. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Milada Walková, but please just call me Millie. And I will be talking about publishing in journals, and I will be talking from my own experience as an author, but also from my experience of being on the editorial board of a journal published at our university. So it's called The Language Scholar. And I've been part of the editorial board, so I can see the process of publishing in journals from the other side as well, not just as an author, but also from the other hidden side. So I would like to share my experience with you and to give you some information and tips for you to consider, because hopefully you will want to publish in a journal at some point. I will also be, so I'm now based at Leeds University, and I feel really grateful because of all the support that we have here. But I previously worked in a periphery country where the access to journals, to literature wasn't straightforward. And because I'm talking to a global community of EAP teachers, I will try and have that in mind, that not everyone is privileged, and I will try to consider that perspective. So if you don't have access to conferences, to journals, what you can do. But before I start talking, I would like you to tell me about your experience of publishing in a journal. So if you have published in a journal, could you please in the chat box tell me, how did you benefit from it? What did you learn from it? What did it give you? And if you have not published in a journal, can you tell me again in the chat box what has prevented you? So let's spend about a minute sharing experience in the chat box. And I know Sam has already shared that she felt imposter syndrome stopped her from publishing. So yeah, that's one of the things that can prevent you from publishing. What other factors have prevented you? Can you let us know in the chat box, please? Okay, so I can see answers coming. Thank you. Okay, so Martha says she has not published. Lack of motivation. So you're saying I wanted to for a long time, but lack of motivation. Hatred of being in front of a screen. Yes, that's true, especially since the pandemic started. And losing sight of why I really want to get published are the main factors. Okay, thanks for sharing that very honestly, Martha. So yes, motivation. Like, do you have enough motivation to put all that energy into this? So I hope today's session will be motivating to many of you, and you will kind of have a list of reasons why you should publish. Okay, Sam is saying lack of knowledge of researching publishing process. Excellent, that's what I want to talk about. And then towards the end or during the session, feel free to add your questions if you have any specific questions which I have not answered. Michael is saying aiming too high at first and getting rejections. That's another thing I will talk about. Thank you. Letitia, some reviewers' comments can be a bit harsh or wrong. Yes, I agree. But in my experience, it's not that common. So if you're trying to publish for the first time, you need to be aware of it. And again, it's something I'll mention. Okay, Rob is saying it's intimidating, a very long process. It definitely is. I don't know enough about the area to contribute anything. Well, that's exactly the reason to do it, because it takes a long time, but in that time, you learn a lot about your area. So that would be one of the reasons to do it. Okay, more comments. Scholarizing my teaching. I like that expression, thank you. Thinking of ideas for research from my teaching practice. Yes, so that's something you can get from writing for publication. My research ends in depressing ways, says John. I'm sorry about that. Without interesting results. And again, I would argue sometimes getting uninteresting results is worthy of publication, because you can show others, well, this is not the way to go. So you save other people time going the same journey. Then we've got, okay, I think I've got too many messages, so I'm not going to comment on them all. So thank you very much. I've tried to comment on at least a few of them. So you've raised a lot of things that I would like to talk about. So let's start by considering the pros and cons of publishing in journals compared to publishing in chapters in books or papers in conference proceedings, as Michelle has talked about. So what are good things about publishing in journals? The submission is open to anybody. So with a conference proceedings paper, you need to have attended a conference. And if you don't have the money from your institution to attend a good conference, you might never be able to contribute to conference proceedings. With book chapters, sometimes there is a call which you can join, but many times you are simply invited without there being an open call. So with journals, you don't have to wait to be invited. You don't have to participate in a conference first. The submission is open to anybody. And also, typically for most journals, you can submit year-round. So there is no particular deadline. Sometimes there is, depending on the journal, but usually you can submit year-round. Now, with conference proceedings and chapters for books, you definitely have a deadline. And if you're like me, you don't like being stressed by a deadline, it's more comfortable to submit to a journal. Another good thing about journals is that they have large readership. So more people will be able to read your paper in a journal than in a book or in conference proceedings. Again, this depends. So as we've talked, the BALEAP conference proceedings will be published digitally, so probably more people will be able to access it. And sometimes journals are small and are not easily found, but in general, I would say journals have larger readership. Another good thing is that you get detailed feedback. And I myself have learned lots about writing by submitting to journals. And one more thing to consider is that if your institution expects you to publish and you get points for publishing, then journal articles typically count more than conference papers or even book chapters. But again, this will depend on your context in which you work. What disadvantages to publishing in journals are there? So the biggest disadvantage is probably that they are very competitive. And as Michelle looked at different types of publications, again, depending on the journal, it might be more difficult to get published in a journal than in conference proceedings. Another important point to remember is that not all journals are created equal. And again, Michelle has already mentioned this, that there are large journals for certain fields. There are also even larger journals not targeting any specific field. And there are small journals, such as the Language Scholar that I mentioned, that are more in-house journals published by one particular institution. And the last disadvantage is that there is no financial reward. And it was good to see the results to Michelle's survey, that this is not a consideration for you. So you're at the right place. I just thought I would make sure I mention it. And I would like to mention an anecdote from my class when I was doing genre analysis with my students, and we were looking at the purpose of a journal article. So I tried to scaffold the purpose to my students, and I said, why do academics write journal articles? Why do they publish in journals? And one student said, to make money. So that is not the case. I have published a lot myself, but I've never made any money from publishing in journals. So if you're seeking financial reward, then journal articles are not for you. Okay, I would like to tell you about the writing and publishing process, and this is something someone mentioned in the chat, so I hope you're curious about this. And often we talk about publishing in journals as the publication game. So I've decided to use this metaphor and talk about the publication game as a board game. So on my slide, you should now see like 5 steps of the publication process. But because it's a board game, it's not as linear as it looks, but sometimes you have to return 1 or 2 steps back and start again. So my first step in the process is writing up, and the second one is selecting a journal. And when Simon comes, he will disagree with me. He will tell you it's the other way around, and it's okay. We've decided to agree to disagree. I will just tell you why I think it's better to start with writing and then to select a journal. I'll see if Simon can convince you of the otherwise. And different things may work for you in different points and for different purposes. So then the third step is submitting, the fourth one revising, and the fifth disseminating. And I will now talk about each step. Apart from the first one, which is about writing, I will leave this to Simon. He will tell you about writing up the actual article in detail. So the second step after you have written up your article is selecting a journal or 3. So as I said, publishing in journals is very competitive. So you've got more chance of your paper being published in the second or third journal rather than the first one. And yes, I've got lots of experience when I managed to publish in my second or third journal, very fewer occasions when I managed to publish in the first journal of my choice. And that is why I would encourage you to, when you're thinking about what journal you would like to submit, from the beginning to think of 2 or 3 journals. And that kind of eases the pressure from you. So it's not like you're aiming for this single journal, and if it doesn't work, you don't know what to do and you need to start from scratch. But you'll be like, okay, if it doesn't work, I've got a plan B and a plan C as well. So I myself use that strategy, and it helps me a lot with managing my anxiety. And that's why I would also say start with writing up your article, because you're not writing for one particular journal and what happens if that doesn't work, but you've got these other plans B and C. When you're selecting a journal, beware of predatory journals. So predatory journals are the kind of journals that seek to make profit of publishing. So they will charge you a lot, but I'm not saying that all the journals that charge authors are predatory, but predatory journals typically promise a quick publication. So we've said it's a long process, but they will promise you, oh, we can publish your article in 2 weeks, meaning there will be no review, and that means that the quality of publications is not guaranteed. Now, predatory journals know that in many countries, academics are pressed to publish quickly, so they will typically get to you. You get an email telling you, dear Dr. Walková, we've read your paper entitled this and this, and we can tell you're an expert in your field. Now that sounds excellent, right? They're writing to me, inviting me to submit an article to them, and they're telling me I'm an expert. So that feels very good when you read it, but there's an intention behind that for them to make money of you. So I would say beware of and stay away from predatory journals. And like I said, I never earned any money from publishing. I also never paid any money to get published. And one of the ways of staying away from costs is that you are aware of predatory journals. Okay, so when you're selecting a journal, what you need to think about is how to best reach your audience and what's the best fit for your career stage. And I've got a list of questions on my slide which you can consider, and these overlap a little bit. So think about how narrow is the journal scope. So if you're in the EAP, you can select a journal which focuses on the EAP only, or which is a bit wider and focuses on language teaching or higher education. Or there are also journals which are so broad in their scope that your EAP paper will be lost because they're like scientific journal of all humanities. So they look like they're good because they've got a large readership, but you're not really targeting the readership you want to. So my second consideration is how large is the readership of the journal? So ideally you want to approach many people, but if these people are from not just the AP, then you need to think about, okay, is the readership really what I'm trying to reach? Another consideration is open access or not. So many journals are open access by default. So if you publish there, people will be able to find your publication, even if their university doesn't have subscription to paid journals. Now, someone asked about the open access option. So even journals that are not open access now offer often this possibility to publish open access. And I've checked it, it's very expensive. And again, I would say stay away from paying costs. If you've got funding to do that, yes, why not? But you wouldn't want to pay from your own pocket, definitely. Now, the thing is that typically the journals which are not open access, but they have to be paid by the library, have more prestige than those that are open access. So that's another thing to weigh and think about, okay, who am I trying to target for this particular paper? Another thing to consider is the rejection rate or the acceptance rate of a particular journal. And you can find this information on some journals' websites. So for example, JEEP has this information on its website, you can check it out. Many journals don't have this information. So what you need to do is kind of gauge your own paper against the papers that are published in this journal. Now, again, if you're in a periphery country and you don't have access to the papers of the journal that you're trying to target, it's difficult. But typically, many journals have 1 or 2 sample articles open access, which you can check. And that is exactly for the authors to know what kind of level is expected. And the last consideration for you is to think about, do you want to aim high or play it safe? And someone mentioned in the chat that they started with aiming too high and they got demotivated. So what does this mean? I said your chance is probably in the 2nd or 3rd journal. So you can think, okay, my level is here, but I'm going to target first a journal of a higher level. And it's okay if they reject me, because then I will probably get to the actual target. Now, it works if you have a lot of time, patience, confidence. It has happened to me that I was aiming for a particular journal, but I decided to aim higher, just give it a try, get some good feedback so that eventually I can get to my target journal. What happened is I managed to publish in the larger journal. So sometimes it works. Or you might want to play it safe and not go higher, but to stay at your level. I would say do not undersell your paper, but you might want to play it safe because it's your first publication and you don't feel confident, or because you've got the requirement to publish, for example, as part of your PhD for your promotion, you need to publish by a certain date. You don't have that extra time to play the game of trying with more journals, in which case you would play it safe. So when you're thinking about what journals to select, I would say also ask yourself, what journals do you read? Look at your reference list and think about what journals are read by the audience that you're hoping to talk to. Okay, then the next step in the process is to submit and wait. So let's say you've selected 2 or 3 journals, then you need to prioritize, okay, depending on whether you want to aim high or play it safe. And you choose the first journal of your choice and you submit to that journal only. Do not submit to more than 1 journal at the same time. It's not ethical because then you're wasting resources of journals. And if it should happen that the same paper should be published in more than 1 journal, it will be a big problem because you will be duplicating your work. And again, there's ethical issues with that. So I said, write up first, then select your journal, but then you still have to go back to your paper and make sure you follow the submission guidelines. So again, go to the website of the journal, familiarize yourself with their guidelines, and please follow the style sheet. At the Language Scholar, we get many submissions which just don't follow the style sheet, and you just don't know how stressful that is to journal managers for that journal. So please do follow the style sheet. Make sure you tick all the boxes. When you're submitting, there are 2 ways of how you can submit, depending on the journal. Some journals have fancy submission systems which guide you through the process step by step by step by step. It takes forever. It's not very user-friendly. Sorry, Rachel. So if you have to submit through a submission system, make sure you reserve at least half a day. It's really daunting. It's time-consuming. It can be very confusing. But you have to go through that if you want to submit to these journals. Other journals have the lovely old-fashioned way of just sending an email. Like at Language Scholar, we just expect an email from you. So in that email, again, check if you need to submit something along with your submission. So things like, do you need a cover page or not? Do you need separate visuals, or can they be just embedded in one file? And in your email, just tell them, please find attached the submission, Tell them in 1 sentence what the submission is about, and then make sure you declare the ethics. So I said, do not submit to more than 1 journal at the same time. So tell them in the email, this paper has not been published before, and it is not under consideration elsewhere. So by doing that, you tick the ethics box, and then they know that they can take your submission seriously. Now you would think, okay, I've written up, I've submitted, the job's done. But the truth is you're only halfway there, and there's a lot of work waiting for you yet. But the good news is that you will have a pause between when you get the feedback on your paper from the journal. And here, make sure you are patient. So I would say, don't expect it to last less than 3 months. Some journals say on their website that they aim for 6 weeks, but in practice, it doesn't really work. And I will tell you later why, how it works. Typical waiting time is around 6 months. But the most I have experienced so far is one paper that we co-wrote with a colleague, submitted in November last year. We're still waiting for reviews. So it can be as extreme as 1 year, hopefully not counting. In the meantime, you can use that pause, that break to work on another project. So that is my secret to my productivity. I just work on multiple projects at the same time. Okay, so you submit, you wait, you're patient, and then you will get feedback. So what happens in that time between you submit and you hear from that is the editor reads your paper, and they decide if they will send your paper to a review. If they decide to send it to a review, they approach 1, 2, or even 3 reviewers. It's typically 1 or 2, depending on the size of the journal. And if those 2 reviewers disagree, then a 3rd one will be approached. Now, the editor selects a reviewer. They kindly ask the reviewer to keep the deadline that they give them. But you know, reviewers are busy people. They're people just like us. I've been reviewing journal articles myself. And again, I've never been paid for that. So it's additional voluntary work that is happening by your colleagues. And people have other deadlines, other commitments. So they do their best to meet the deadline, but it takes a lot of time. So if you're thinking, why haven't I heard anything from the journal? It's been already a month. Well, that's because reviewers are your colleagues, basically. Okay, so the kind of feedback you can get. So if the editor decides not to send your paper for review, it's called desk rejection. And it's quite daunting. It doesn't feel good, and it has happened to me. It's either because you have selected the wrong journal, so the scope of, you don't fit in the scope of the journal, or because the editor feels that the level of your manuscript is nowhere near where the journal wants it. And that is what happened to me. It wasn't nice. But when this happens, the editor will send you like a paragraph explaining why. What you need to do is to use that explanation to improve your paper, to revise it and submit elsewhere. Because if you submit it elsewhere as is, you're likely to get the same response. So you want to improve it before you submit it elsewhere. And like I said, don't submit to 2 journals at the same time. You need to have that confirmation from the first journal that they're rejecting you, and then you can submit elsewhere. If the editor sends your paper to reviews, there can be basically 4 outcomes of that. It's either reject, and again, you will get lots of detailed feedback, which you need to use to improve your manuscript and submit it elsewhere. Or there can be major revisions, which might mean restructuring your paper, recoding your data, lots of rewriting. But that is actually good news because they've got hope in your paper. So use the feedback, improve your manuscript, and resubmit it to the same journal. Another outcome is minor revisions, so that will be much less rewriting. Again, use the feedback to revise and you resubmit to the same journal. Or the last option is accept as is, but that's mostly theoretical. It doesn't really happen. And if it does happen, then I'm thinking it's not a good journal. So it has happened to me that basically all the revisions were, you've got a typo here and a typo there. So it was essentially accept as is, but I wasn't happy with that, because the purpose of reviews is to improve your manuscript. So I thought to myself, I'm not submitting to the same journal again, because I don't feel they've done their job. Now, when you get that feedback, make sure you approach it with both humbleness and criticality. So by humbleness, I mean you will need to accept most of the suggestions. And sometimes, as someone said in the chat, the comments can be harsh. And it's also very difficult because you put your best into your paper. It's your little baby. You don't want it to be criticized. And now you get lots of feedback. So normally you would think you'll get a pat on the back. Well done. Thank you for submitting. It's published. But that doesn't happen. You will get lots of negative comments, but hopefully constructive, telling you how you need to improve your paper. And sometimes it can be annoying. You're thinking, oh, the reviewer doesn't understand what I'm trying to say. But if the reviewer doesn't understand, your readers won't understand either. So think of your reviewers as samples of your readership, and you need to make it clear to the reader. You need to convince your reader, and you can test that by convincing your reviewer. At the same time, I would say approach feedback with criticality. So you don't have to accept all the suggestions. It's okay to disagree with the reviewer, but you have to justify it. So how do you do that? When you rewrite your paper and you submit your revised version, you need to send along your comments in a table. So on my slide, you can see like part of that table. So you take both reviews, or how many reviews you have, break them down into numbered comments, and then for each number, for each comment, you write your own comments. So you say, I agree with this and I have changed it in the paper as follows, and you quote from the paper, or you can justify why you disagree with this and why you have decided not to implement a particular change. Okay, and the last step in the process, hopefully you've gone through all of the game, you got into your destination, you have published successfully. Now it's time to disseminate. And I still myself find it difficult because, yeah, it feels like, oh, I don't want to brag about my work, but it's something we all need to do, to learn to do as well. So make sure you draw attention to your published paper. You can include a reference and a link to it in your email sign-off. You can put it on your university profile. You can advertise it through social media, whether it's Twitter or professional social media like Academia Edu, and talk to colleagues about it within your institution and beyond. So that's all from me on publishing in journals. And I want to conclude that it's not an easy journey, but it's very rewarding. It has definitely made me a better writer, like someone said in the chat box. Learning to write makes you a better teacher of writing. So it has also, I believe it has also made me a better teacher of EAP. Thank you.
Right, good afternoon, everybody. Great to see you all. First of all, just a quick apology that I'm full of flu and I was losing my voice when I was teaching earlier today. So I've got a flu drink here I'm going to be supping on throughout. But what I'd like to do in this section is just to build on what Michelle and Millie have already been talking about. I put the Wenger quote here, not because I'm going to talk about communities of practice in detail, which Daron will be doing following this, but I wanted to emphasize the fact that as a community, we pick up advice, understandings of how publishing operates, and also the writing process, and how we can develop and how we can develop routines and useful writing habits. So what I'm going to be presenting in this section is partly based on research that I've conducted into EAP practitioners who are transitioning into research writing, partly based on personal experience and anecdotal in that respect, and also in the literature on this subject. Now, there's a lot of literature, especially in the second section when I move into how to get started in writing and writing advice. So what I'm offering today is purely some largely subjective perspectives. And within this understanding of a community of practice, I would greatly encourage you to begin talking to more people, hearing their stories, their experiences, their preferences, what's worked for them. And this is why, after my contribution, we'll be working within breakout rooms precisely for this, so that we, as a community, we can be exposed to people's different experiences and different tips that they have. Now, I'm going to try to just blend in the first couple of points with the really excellent introduction or excellent description that Millie's provided. My position into this is comes from personal experience. I put, choose the genre and focus that meets your needs. And the agency there is a reminder for me to think about the research that I did with a number of EAP practitioners. And by this, I mean that if we have a range of options from blogs to in-house journals to book chapters to a range of journals, for example, one of the things I found in my research is that where EAP practitioners who are coming into writing were making strategic choices. So this might be, for example, where practitioners felt exposed in terms of putting writing into the public sphere for a appropriately critical audience. If they felt exposed in terms of the methodological approaches, for example, perhaps not having had the benefit of, for example, doctoral research or formal study in research methods, then they might make choices such as conducting practitioner research, where the argument of one of the participants was, well, look, this is me doing it. This is me kind of leading it. This is the approach I took. And so in this way, the practitioner felt less exposed to external criticism. And another point is the way that we might carve out routes for ourselves. One of the participants described this as stepping stones from what felt a very developmental experience, working with an in-house journal, for example, to then working on, for that participant, a more ambitious project of working in a single authored article. So what I'm suggesting is where there are challenges, I don't want to focus too much on these. I would suggest that we can exercise our own agency in terms of navigating the routes that we take. Now, one of the decisions is clearly who the authors are going to be. Now, we may be involved in single authored publications, but there are also choices to be made around collaborations, whether these are with more experienced colleagues, whether there's going to be a mentor relationship of a more experienced published author working with us, whether this is going to be a group of practitioners who are working together and learning through this whole process in terms of presenting their work. So I mention this partly because I realized I began my own journey very much thinking of individual efforts. And when I've collaborated with other writers, I found it particularly useful, particularly enjoyable, and being able to get a lot of feedback from the papers benefited from the different perspectives. One piece of advice I was given early on when I had when I collected data for a study and I had quite a few ideas, was to try to pin down the focus of the paper that I was going to do. And a really useful way to do that is to draft a very specific title, which means it takes time and it's a filtering process and it's a honing process, etc. But just to decide for that paper what you want the focus to be. Now, clearly, if you've a study that you've conducted and the data you have might go in different directions, it might serve for a range of different papers. So you will be aware of different possibilities, but there comes a point where we need to start making choices. And with that title, an abstract is a good exercise in disciplining yourself and really trying to nail precisely what we think this paper should be doing, how you're going to be framing it. Now, I fully accept the points that Millie made earlier in terms of thinking of a range of publications that you might be considering. I think the points I'm going to make here are complementary as well. Useful advice I was given at an in-house workshop on scholarship writing was to not go too far with a piece of writing before selecting the journal that I was thinking about submitting it for. And one of the examples that comes to mind is that, I had a lot of data at a time when I was very interested in learner training for language tandems. And I just begun to think about writing up all of the data that I had there. And then I realized, actually, because of the very practical application of this, and I felt at the time popular appeal, that ELTJ would actually be a useful journal for that if I emphasize the steps that teachers could take this learner training process. Now, so I developed the writing to a certain point to help clarify the ideas, but just at the point where I had that input from a colleague, I realized that if I'd gone further with that paper, then I would have had to completely reworked it. And I appreciate ELTJ is an exception in the length and the requirements, but that article just needed to be 4,000 words and had a limit of 15 references, 15 sources within the article. So if I pushed forward too far, then clearly I would have then had to rework. So the only point I was trying to make here was perhaps to think at a certain point, rather than, as I was doing mistakenly, thinking about writing a paper in its entirety and then looking around for a journal, at a certain point in development to be making that choice. And another reason why you might be doing that is that in terms of the individual journals, you may be wanting to frame the paper differently. So a recent paper that I co-wrote on EMI teacher training in intensive courses for EMI teachers. When we looked at the journals that were available, we realized for some of them, there might be more of an emphasis on EMI. For some of them, it might be more just on teacher development per se. Some of them were more international in their perspective. And this is just why at a certain point, I think it can be useful to make your choices and then continue developing the work towards that publication. Let's see. Once we've got the this abstract, then actually because it forces you to really condense down the way that you want the work to look and the issues you want it to cover, and the the data sets that you're going to be drawing upon, you can then use that in order to develop a framework for the main paper. I put in plan a writing timeline for various reasons. I mean, one of the difficulties in our busy professional lives is finding time to write and keeping a certain sense of continuity. Writing timelines give us some flexibility, but also have some immovable dates. They give us an end date, which can fit in with, if, for example, there are calls for papers. And also the different steps that we need to cover in this writing timeline can give us a certain sense of satisfaction and progress as we are developing the paper over what is usually quite a considerable period of time. Now, I found it really useful to get early feedback from others during this process. Now, it depends on the relationships we have with others, but it can be very useful to have some critical perspectives on this, I would suggest, before we develop too far along the line, and colleagues can see kind of very useful implications of what we're writing that might not be so obvious to ourselves. I've just emphasized here how iterative writing is, and it's useful for ourselves to remind ourselves that necessarily writing involves drafting, redrafting, etc. And in the findings for the practitioner research I was involved in, the image of an ideal professional self came through. Actually, it was something that was quite powerful for some of the tutors. So if we think of the range of motivations that Michelle's mentioned and that you looked at in the first section about getting capital, prestige, etc., having curiosity at times of our own ability to produce academic publications, then in the research I conducted, the participants mentioned, for example, imagining their curriculums with papers listed, or imagining going to conferences and being able to talk about current papers which they'd written, or having their having recent publications in their academic signatures. And that by keeping these images quite strong in their mind and very kind of clear and building on them, projecting, then this helped them to draw on the initial motivation to reinforce that, so that they could help themselves through some of the periods where they might have found it, if not laborious, then time consuming and involving certain sacrifices along the way. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to do in this section very much was to start us thinking about getting writing and how we can begin this process, because certainly in the research I was conducting, I found practitioners who were well aware of how the publications could help them. They were interested in it, and they often felt that they'd done good action research and other pieces of scholarship that they felt were well worth sharing. But the actual writing process itself was often quite intimidating. Now, this is why I say there's a lot of research and there's a lots of blogs and lists of tips for writing. But I particularly like the Mark Twain quote, because behind the idea of all you need to do is to cross out the wrong words, it's the idea of writing without fear, writing without editing, writing in a flow of consciousness, and just putting down your initial ideas. So this is why I've put, well, it's a sentence, and then it's another sentence, it's another sentence. And the longer pieces of writing that we do, as we've done in our formal studies, they begin small and they build up over time. A piece of advice that I was given was, don't wait for inspiration. Don't wait for that magical day where everything seems clear to sit down and write. But actually, it's through the writing process itself that the inspiration will come. And so it's better to get into good, regular habits of sitting down and writing. And then through that process, you will then tap into the inspiration. So as I say, I really detest looking at the first drafts I do, but accepting that the first pieces of writing that I do will be completely unacceptable, I then force myself to write, just to force myself to sit down. I've got the plan, and just to write and to do the padding up. I know it's going to be edited later. I know from experience, I haven't found a way of writing good, clean text the way I want it to look straight off. But I have learned that first draft will look very, very, very different as time goes on and it's edited. And this is why when I put write without fear, this is from a Stephen King quote. The scariest moment is always just before you start, and then it can only get better. So thinking about the writing itself can be more intimidating than actually engaging it. Now, commit yourself to deadlines. I talked earlier about a timeline, but where there are calls for papers, or where there are edited books and you're contributing a book chapter, or where there is a group of writers but you've agreed together certain dates by which work needs to be done, or any deadline that you can find which is pretty much immovable for you, then this avoids us kicking the work further down the line, because we need to obviously to get involved in the writing. So this is one of the areas where everybody's got some advice, and in the breakout rooms, I would encourage you to share your own experiences and to find out those of other people. But when I looked at the literature, there seemed to be a reasonable consensus around having a designated time to write, so regular time. So I really like writing very early in the morning. Then 6 to 8 is the time when I'm most awake. I like to sit down before beginning the university working day, and as that becomes a regular time for writing, I'm ready, my brain's ready, etc. Phones are all off. Nobody's really contacting me at that time in the morning. But clearly, we need to get into a mode of writing. I like to be very kind of isolated for writing, but a recurrent idea in the literature is to be in environments where other people are writing and working, on the grounds that will encourage us also then just to stay on task for specific periods of time. Now, personally, I try to touch base with my writing pretty much every day, even if it's just to tidy up a paragraph or to look at one or two of the kind of reference. And that contact means that I always feel that I'm following it up, like keeping the ideas clean in my own mind. There are organized events which can help in terms of really forcing yourselves to press ahead with the writing. So we have had in our school shut up and write sessions, which are sessions with rooms booked where people go along. It's, for example, 40 minutes where everybody gets their heads down and just writes, 10 minutes perhaps for feedback or a break, another 40-minute session. And I and other colleagues have really made great progress with those periods where the work's been planned. than just to actually produce those first drafts. As I say, there's a lot of literature. I particularly found the Gelongo and Saracho publication useful, and I've put that at the end, and this gives a much more systematic approach to and guide to your academic writing. And what I'd like to invite you to do now is we're going to set up the breakout sessions for approximately 15 minutes. And in the spirit of Vengo, what I'd like us to do then is to share our own journeys, to share whether if we are just contemplating scholarship writing, or you might be thinking about your next steps, thinking about the writing routines that might best work for you, what's worked past, thinking about current commitments and how you might fit this in. If we've got colleagues here who've got more experience, whether it be, and I find it fascinating to hear how people have begun their early experiences. We've all learnt one or two things, perhaps painfully and along the way. And also then perhaps to think about the strategies that they've developed since. So kind of a sharing of practices for scholarship writing. Okay.
I think everyone's back now, Simon. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Simon, or shall I take over now?
Oh, no, thanks. Sorry, I was going to let you just take over for the next section.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, I hope everyone was able to share their experiences in your breakout rooms. I'm just gonna wrap up the session this evening for us here in Singapore. Let me just share my screen. Just give me a moment. I think from what has been shared so far, we can see that, we don't necessarily have to be on this scholarship journey on our own, or the writing journey. I think it's something that we can do with our critical friends. I think that term came up a number of times in the chat, and it's good to know that some of us here do have colleagues who are critical friends who can kind of help us, give us support as we go through this journey. And in the session just now, I think some of us were talking about how, with some of our scholarship, we don't necessarily have to work on it on our own. It doesn't have to be done solo. And some of them actually can be done well with a network, okay? And that's what I'll be talking about as the last part of this afternoon's session, okay? In the literature, we can find a lot of information about professional learning networks. And I think various studies, various scholars have pointed out how useful and how valuable being in such a community can be, okay? Professional growth is supported. And I like the second point here, where there are, exchanges of new ideas, developments, and even thinking of new ways of applying what we do in our own classroom, thinking of ways of how it might be applied in a different setting. And I think, especially for writing, it's always good to have that support system. Even if the person is not a co-author, I think from the presentations by Millie, for example, and from Simon's section, we can see that, having someone else to kind of read through our draft can be quite helpful. And sometimes this can be done at those writing retreats, okay? I'm just gonna go to the next slide. And like what Michelle had pointed out earlier on, motivation plays a very large role in our scholarship journey, not just trying to conceptualize what it is that we want to investigate or research, but also like what Simon had said a while ago, writing down the first sentence. And motivation can be drawn from being in a community or being in a part of a network. And like what was mentioned in the chat a while ago, some of you had said that you have critical friends. And for some of my EAP publications, some of my EAP scholarship, I have relied on critical friends. not just as someone, you know, whom I can bounce ideas off, but also as co-authors. This year, I was able to get a paper out by using this concept of critical friend. We were trying to see ways of disrupting how English is conceived, especially in this part of the world in Asia. And it was a very valuable experience because I was reflecting on my own teaching in my classrooms here in Singapore. And my critical friend is a teacher educator in Thailand. And she has different perceptions as to what EAP should be, very different from how we view EAP here in Singapore. So I think it added different angles, you know, to what I was looking at. And I think it made it a little bit more interesting to read. Okay, it's not so insular in terms of, you know, just me talking about how EAP is conceived here in Singapore. So I think not just being a part of the writing journey, but also to be actually a co-author, like what Simon had said a while ago. Okay.